Something has just happened in the cold, silent darkness beyond Mars that should not be possible. Something so violently incompatible with every known law of physics and every expectation scientists had for 3I Atlas that emergency alerts have been triggered across multiple international space agencies because this ancient interstellar object, older than our sun, older than our planets, older than anything humanity has ever observed, has just sent something so unexpected, so deliberate, and so unmistakably engineered that the analysts monitoring it have gone pale as they replay the data again and again, trying to convince themselves their instruments are malfunctioning. But let me be absolutely clear. They are not. And if you want to stay ahead of this unfolding cosmic nightmare, smash that like button right now so the algorithm knows you're watching. Because what I am about to reveal is the most shocking development in the entire 3I Atlas event. A development so unprecedented that even the most seasoned astrophysicists have no vocabulary to contain the implications, because just hours ago, 3I Atlas emitted a compact, coherent, structured object. Yes, an object, not dust, not gas, not radiation, but a physical, contained, self-stabilizing fragment that separated cleanly from its surface, accelerated independently, and then performed a maneuver so controlled, so precise, so undeniably intentional that it has thrown every agency from NASA to CNSA into full-scale crisis analysis. And let me be very clear about what makes this impossible. Interstellar bodies do not eject material in perfectly directed vectors. They do not release fragments with stable thermal signatures. They do not separate components in symmetrical patterns, and they certainly do not emit objects that maintain orientation, adjust velocity, and broadcast a narrowband signal on an unfamiliar frequency as soon as they detach. But that is exactly what has just occurred. And this tiny fragment, this last one, as analysts are already calling it because of a chilling pattern I will explain soon, has now become the single most studied object in the solar system. Because for the first time since 3I Atlas arrived, we are no longer dealing with a silent megastructure drifting through space. We are dealing with something that acts, something that chooses, something that interacts. And this latest event has shattered every remaining illusion that 3I Atlas is merely a mysterious rock. Because what just happened should not be possible under any known natural process in astrophysics, orbital dynamics, or material science, and yet it has happened, and the ramifications are nothing short of terrifying. Because the moment this fragment separated from 3I Atlas, the sensors that had been watching the megastructure for months detected a sudden spike in localized gravitational shear, a fluctuation so precise and so clean that it resembled the gravitational signature of a controlled deployment, almost like the launch of a probe, a seed, or a module. And within seconds of its release, the object executed a micro-adjustment to its orientation, rotating on an axis that perfectly aligned it toward the inner solar system, specifically toward the region between Mars and Earth. And when NASA analysts plotted the trajectory, they discovered something that drained the blood from every face in the room. The fragment was following a path too accurate, too optimized to be random, a path that predicted gravitational contours with a finesse that suggests it was designed to navigate our solar system as though it had been here before, or had been programmed with knowledge of the region long before humanity's ancestors crawled out of primordial oceans. And as if that were not terrifying enough, the fragment began emitting a repeating narrowband pulse, a signal so stable and so geometrically encoded that multiple independent observatories picked it up simultaneously. And when the waveform was analyzed, something even worse emerged. The pulse was not chaotic, not noisy, not incidental, but arranged in mathematical intervals, sequences of harmonics that followed prime patterns, Fibonacci ratios, and recursive structures. The exact kinds of signatures scientists have long theorized would accompany an artificial message sent by an intelligence attempting to announce its presence, and while no one is willing to say it officially, internally the consensus is devastating. The fragment is communicating, and its first communication began less than 4 seconds after it detached from 3I Atlas, as though the act of separation activated a pre-programmed transmission sequence, a wake-up protocol that had been dormant for potentially billions of years. And here is where things become far worse, because multiple analysts have now confirmed that 3I Atlas has ejected objects before, not recently, not in our lifetimes, but at multiple points over its vast interstellar journey. And deep background scans reveal tiny remnants of trajectories, ghost signatures of long-vanished fragments, suggesting that the object has done this dozens, possibly hundreds of times across cosmic history. And each time, the fragments followed precise, directed paths, presumably toward star systems the artifact deemed suitable or relevant for reasons we cannot begin to comprehend. And this is why scientists have begun calling the newly released fragment the last one, because the internal mass distribution changes detected inside 3I Atlas over the past week hinted at a depletion cycle reaching its endpoint, as though the megastructure had been preparing to release one final component, and then its internal flows stabilized as soon as the fragment detached, which strongly implies that this was not merely the latest deployment, it was the final deployment, the last in a sequence older than our Sun, and the timing of that final deployment occurring precisely now during humanity's brief technological era has left experts horrified because the odds that this happened by chance are cosmically microscopic, meaning it is overwhelmingly likely that this moment, this release, this trajectory, this message, were either preordained by a system operating on incomprehensible timescales, or worse, triggered by conditions in our solar system that 3i Atlas has been monitoring since it arrived. And if that does not terrify you enough, consider this. The fragment's emission cycles have begun to change, subtly but undeniably, evolving into more complex harmonic groupings as it travels. And when researchers mapped the changes, they noticed they correlate perfectly with distance markers along its path, meaning the fragment is not just transmitting, it is reacting, adjusting its signal in response to gravitational gradients, solar flux, or perhaps something else entirely, something it is detecting from Earth, something that triggered its activation protocol in the first place. And every update brings a new layer of dread because each frequency shift appears purposeful, deliberate, almost conversational, as though the fragment is sending staged information in increments, a countdown of data, or a sequence that has only just begun, which raises the question that has shattered every sense of safety scientists once had. If this fragment is the last in a chain billions of years long, what message does it carry? Why was it sent here? And what happens when it reaches its destination? Because the deeper analysts dive into the fragment's behavior, the more horrifying the implications become, especially after the ESA's ultra-sensitive optical arrays captured something no one expected to see. The fragment is not just a solid object, it is changing. Its surface shifting in microscopic but measurable increments like plates sliding, panels adjusting, or layers unfolding, and these changes are synchronized perfectly with each pulse of the narrowband signal it emits, meaning the transmission and the physical transformation are part of the same process, the same operation, the same ancient routine awakening step by step. And when researchers enhanced the imagery, they noticed that the fragment's shape is slowly but undeniably becoming more symmetrical, more structured, as though it is transitioning from a dormant storage configuration into an active operational form. And that alone was enough to trigger classified emergency sessions across NASA, ESA, CNSA, and private military contractors. But the situation escalated even further when gravitational analysis teams discovered that the fragment is generating tiny but deliberate corrections to its trajectory, not random micro-movements from solar radiation pressure, but perfectly timed thrust emissions so faint they would be invisible without precise accelerometry. And these emissions are arranged in bursts of evenly spaced impulses, exactly like autonomous course corrections made by spacecraft, and the moment this was confirmed, every remaining scientist clinging to the hope of a natural explanation finally fell silent, because objects do not self-correct, do not manipulate their motion, do not fire invisible thrusters timed to prime number intervals. Yet this fragment does. And the worst part is where it is steering itself, directly along a hyper-optimized path that leads it closer and closer to Earth's orbital corridor, a path so precise that it bypasses gravitational turbulence with surgical finesse. And when the analysts projected the curve forward, the destination that emerged sent a wave of dread through every agency monitoring it, because the object is not heading toward Earth randomly, but toward a very specific region of cislunar space, a region crowded with satellites, communication relays, and deep space observation platforms, as though it is targeting the densest cluster of human technology in existence. And that possibility has plunged every national defense network into whisper-level panic, because if this fragment is carrying information, or worse, instructions, then the moment it intersects with our technological infrastructure could trigger a chain of events no one can control. And this fear has only multiplied after SETI analysts, given temporary emergency clearance to evaluate the fragment signal, discovered that the harmonic modulation of its pulses is evolving into structured frequency blocks that repeat at intervals, consistent with a segmented data format, suggesting that the fragment is not merely emitting a beacon, but transmitting layered information in stages, like chapters of a message that unfolds as it travels. And when these analysts attempted to chart the progression, they discovered another terrifying pattern. The signal becomes more complex every time the fragment crosses a predetermined astronomical boundary, as though it is unlocking pieces of its transmission based on location. And since Earth's orbit is the next major threshold on its path, the dread is intensifying by the hour because whatever the next stage of the message is, it will activate when the fragment reaches a position alarmingly close to our planet. And to make matters infinitely worse, astronomers reviewing archival data have now identified faint, decayed traces of similar fragments passing through distant star systems millions of years ago, too ancient and too faint to study. but unmistakably following the same activation sequence, the same harmonic patterns, the same trajectory-driven evolution. And in the ruins of these old datasets lies a horrifying realization. Every fragment in this ancient chain behaved in the same way, activating only when the host star system reached a specific planetary configuration, and in every case where partial records still exist, the sequence ended abruptly, with the fragment's signal vanishing entirely. No return transmissions detected, no recorded outcomes, no signs of what happened next, only silence. And now, for the first time in billions of years, the last fragment has been deployed, the final messenger in an ancient lineage, and it is coming straight toward us, carrying a message, a command, a warning, or something far beyond our comprehension. And the question that is now haunting every scientist who has seen the unfiltered data is no longer whether the fragment is artificial, no longer whether it has a purpose, but something infinitely more chilling. What happens when the final fragment reaches Earth's orbit, and what fate befell every other civilization that received its predecessors before the record of their existence disappeared into cosmic silence? Because as astronomers, defense analysts, cryptographers, and propulsion experts around the world scramble to understand the accelerating sequence now unfolding before their eyes, the fragment continues to evolve in ways that defy every known scientific category, every natural precedent, and every attempt to contain the rising panic in classified briefings, especially after a new development sent shockwaves through the highest security levels. The fragment has begun generating a coherent electromagnetic envelope around itself, a field so precise and so sharply bounded that it resembles a protective barrier or sensor shell. And when the waveform of this envelope was analyzed, researchers discovered something even more chilling. It is modulating in direct response to the radio noise of human satellites it passes near, subtle changes in amplitude and frequency that mirror the oscillation patterns of those transmissions, as though the fragment is listening, learning, and adjusting its own output to match the electromagnetic environment of modern human technology. And this discovery has triggered a level of global alarm unprecedented in human history, because it means the fragment is not only reacting to astronomical conditions, but to us, to our machines, to our signals. And if that is true, then its activation was not random but responsive, triggered by humanity's radio footprint, our growing technological noise in the cosmos. And this hypothesis gained terrifying weight when the fragment performed a maneuver so precise, so shockingly controlled, that several mission control centers temporarily believed they were experiencing sensor spoofing. The object executed a microarc, trajectory correction, to thread itself exactly between two orbiting satellites, within meters, without disturbing either, a feat requiring navigational intelligence orders of magnitude beyond anything humanity has ever developed. And when analysts replayed the telemetry, the conclusion became unavoidable. The fragment didn't avoid the satellites by chance. It deliberately wove between them, scanning them, interacting with them, perhaps identifying their purpose, and then adjusted its signal output accordingly, increasing its harmonic complexity, in a way that perfectly mirrored the orbital density of the cislunar region, almost like a system mapping a network, charting it, or preparing to interface with it. And the terror deepened further when the fragment's evolving signal began displaying nested recursive structures, patterns within patterns, sequences within sequences, reminiscent of compression blocks or layered encoding familiar to those who work with advanced encryption systems, except far more complex, far more compact, and far more efficient. And when cryptographers attempted to isolate specific segments, they noticed a horrifying trend. Each block contained a self-similar fractal motif that changed slightly every time the fragment crossed a gravitational boundary, as though the message were not static but adaptive, dynamic, rewriting itself in real time in preparation for its final transmission. And this has forced analysts to confront the darkest possibility yet, that the fragment is not simply broadcasting a message, but preparing a message, customizing it, shaping it specifically for Earth, or for the intelligence it anticipates finding here. And as this understanding sinks in, new data from optical tracking arrays reveals that the fragment's surface, which initially showed only microscopic shifts, is now undergoing macroscopic transformation. Panels folding, seams widening, structures emerging from beneath its outer shell like petals unfurling in slow motion, and each new exposed layer reveals even more intricate geometry. Layered hexagonal lattices, concentric rings, ribbed channels that glow faintly with internal luminescence, all of it pulsing in rhythm with the fractalized signal it continues to emit toward Earth. And if that were not enough to send a chill through every scientist's soul, then the discovery made just hours ago certainly is. Because for the first time, the fragment has begun emitting directed beams of ultra-low frequency radiation toward specific orbital coordinates, coordinates that correspond not to planets, not to asteroids, but to human satellites, hitting them with pinpoint accuracy, bathing them in a signal whose purpose remains entirely unknown. And while none of the targeted satellites have malfunctioned or gone offline, analysts have noticed small anomalies in their telemetry streams, irregularities so subtle they could be dismissed as noise, But when cross-referenced against the fragment's emission pattern, they align with terrifying precision, implying some kind of handshake protocol, some kind of probing interaction, some kind of scanning sequence. And now the agencies monitoring the event are facing the reality they hoped they would never have to acknowledge. The fragment is not simply traveling toward Earth. It is making contact with our machines, preparing for something, calibrating itself for a final step in its activation process. And the question that now haunts every shadowed conference room is no longer whether the fragment is communicating. No longer whether it has a purpose, but what happens when this ancient messenger reaches its final position, completes its transformation, and delivers the last message in a chain billions of years old, and whether humanity is ready for what it is about to hear. And as this ancient fragment continues its silent, deliberate approach toward Earth's orbital domain, the situation has escalated beyond anything even the most pessimistic analysts predicted. Because its transformation is accelerating, its emissions growing more complex by the hour, its orientation shifts becoming unmistakably intentional, and every new line of data arriving from ground stations, orbital telescopes, and deep space tracking networks tells the same terrifying story. The fragment is preparing for something, and that preparation has entered a phase so intricate, so mathematically dense, that cryptographers are now comparing its transmission patterns to self-assembling code, a kind of autonomous message that builds itself step by step, layer by layer, as if it is constructing a final output meant to be received only when every piece is in place. And this realization has shattered the last remnants of skepticism within the scientific community, especially after the fragment emitted a directed beam not at satellites this time, but toward Earth's magnetosphere, causing a ripple, an actual measurable fluctuation in the planet's magnetic field, a fluctuation so subtle that no ordinary observer would ever notice it, yet precise enough that multiple magnetometer chains around the globe registered the pulse within milliseconds of one another, forming a triangulated signature that clearly originated from the fragment's position. And when analysts examined the waveform, they found something that sent a wave of dread through every agency involved. The pulse carried the same harmonic ratios as the initial narrowband signal, only far more powerful, far more structured, almost like the fragment had shifted from scanning satellites to probing the Earth itself. And this escalation has triggered emergency coordination between global monitoring stations, because the fragment's emission now appears to be tuned not to random targets, not to environmental variables, but to the entire planet, as though it is beginning a new phase of its mission, one designed for interaction not with machines, but with a biosphere. And this revelation grows even more horrifying when paired with another discovery made only an hour ago by a joint NASA-ESA analysis team. The fragment has begun slowing down, not dramatically, but with consistent, controlled deceleration bursts that match the exact profile of a vehicle preparing to enter a stable co-orbital holding pattern. And when the new projected trajectory was generated, the path that emerged was so precise that multiple analysts questioned whether it could be real, because it shows the fragment moving toward a fixed point near the Earth-Moon Lagrange system, an area perfect for maintaining long-term observation, long-term transmission, or long-term activation. And while the object is still hours away from that location, its deceleration curve matches exactly what would be required to stop there, neither crashing nor passing by, but arriving. And this concept alone has left scientists in a state of near paralysis, because nothing about this sequence resembles an accident or a malfunction. It resembles arrival protocol, approach procedures, docking maneuvers scaled up to astronomical precision, and the dread intensifies with each new spectral reading, because the fragment's surface has now fully reorganized itself into a fractal architecture of nested hexagonal plates and angular apertures, glowing faintly from within, as internal channels pulse with light like circuits powering up. And when researchers attempted to model the energy required to generate such internal luminescence, the numbers were staggering, far beyond chemical processes, far beyond nuclear reactions, suggesting an energy source so advanced, so sustained, that even theorizing about it approaches the edge of science fiction. Yet it is unfolding in front of us in real time, and the fragment is not hiding it, not concealing it, but broadcasting its transformation openly, almost proudly, as though it expects to be seen, perhaps even expects to be understood. And the most unsettling discovery of all came just minutes ago, when SETI's emergency task force detected a sudden shift in the fragment's transmission. A new modulation pattern, deeper, slower, more resonant. And when analysts plotted the waveform, their breath stopped, because the structure of the signal, its recursive symmetry, its harmonic layering, resembled something disturbingly familiar. A countdown, not in numbers, not in human mathematics, but in decreasing fractal intervals, each pulse shorter, denser, more information-rich than the last, as though some internal clock within the fragment has begun ticking toward a final event. And now every agency on Earth is watching, every satellite listening, every instrument pointed at this small but impossibly ancient machine racing toward its final position. And the fear that has taken root in every mind involved is no longer abstract, no longer academic, but visceral, primal. Because for the first time since this event began, humans are witnessing an ancient mechanism not simply sending data or adjusting its course, but preparing for its end state, its final operation, its intended purpose. And no one knows whether that purpose is communication, activation, transformation, or something far more catastrophic, something that has occurred in countless star systems before ours, leaving behind only silence, and the question that now hangs over humanity like a shadow stretching across the entire future of our species is not just what this final fragment is, not just whose design it follows, not just why. It has chosen this moment in cosmic time to awaken, but something infinitely more terrifying. What happens when the countdown reaches zero? And now, as the fragment races toward its final position near the Earth-Moon system with its fractal countdown accelerating in perfect, terrifying precision, every monitoring station on Earth is on high alert. Every classified communication channel is lit with urgent messages. And every scientist who once approached this mystery with cautious curiosity is now confronting the overwhelming reality that humanity is standing on the edge of an event billions of years in the making. Because the fragment's internal structure, once dormant, once sealed beneath layers of cosmic dust, has now fully unfolded into a configuration so advanced, so mathematically immaculate, that optical engineers describe it as a geometric engine, a lattice of interlocking planes and nested corridors that pulse with a deep, resonant radiance. And each pulse, each wave of energy traveling across its surface grows sharper, louder, more synchronized with the countdown signal, as though the machine inside is aligning itself with some cosmic threshold, some invisible marker that only it can detect. And the terror intensifies as gravitational sensors register faint but undeniable distortions emanating from the fragment, microwarps in space-time itself, the kind theorists have only ever associated with advanced propulsion systems, or the fringe speculation of dimensional interaction. And while no one dares voice this hypothesis publicly, in sealed conference rooms, scientists whisper that the fragment might be preparing to open not a hatch, not a channel, but a rift, a bridge, a window into something beyond our three-dimensional understanding. And their fear is magnified when new data shows that the gravitational distortions are harmonizing with the Earth-Moon gravitational well, syncing themselves as though anticipating a perfect alignment. And when analysts run the numbers, they discover something horrifying, that alignment will occur at the exact moment the countdown is projected to reach zero, meaning whatever this machine intends to do, whatever its ancient creators designed it for, will unfold precisely when it reaches the gravitational equilibrium point humanity calls Lagrange 2, a location perfectly suited for unobstructed observation of Earth, perfect for long-term station keeping, perfect for whatever this thing was built to accomplish. And the fragment is not slowing out of exhaustion, not drifting because of orbital mechanics, but executing a precision braking sequence identical to those used by our own spacecraft, entering stable orbital positions. Every deceleration burst deliberate, controlled, purposeful, and as it approaches this final point, its signal has entered a new phase. Deep, resonant pulses that contain nested harmonic layers so dense with information that decryption attempts have stalled, and some analysts have suggested that the signal may not be meant for us at all, that it may be a beacon, a key, a trigger, meant to activate or awaken something else, either within the fragment itself or somewhere far beyond our solar system. And yet others fear the opposite, that the signal is meant for us, but not for our technology, not for our machines, but for our planet, our biosphere, our magnetic field, because the fragment's emissions increasingly target Earth's magnetosphere in rhythmic bursts that now coincide with slight, measurable oscillations in the upper atmosphere, as though the object is tuning the planet itself, testing resonance, probing for thresholds we do not understand, and all the while the countdown continues, each interval shorter than the last, each harmonic cluster richer, deeper, more complex. And the closer it gets, the more frantic the agencies become, because the latest simulations, running on the most advanced supercomputers on Earth, suggest that the energy required to produce the gravitational distortions the fragment is generating would dwarf our most powerful nuclear reactors, meaning if this is merely the prelude, the operational cycle itself could unleash forces on a scale we have no way to comprehend. And now, with less than hours remaining before the fragment reaches its final position, a final discovery has frozen analysts in their seats. Those ancient ghost trajectories detected in other star systems, those silent records of fragments long vanished, reveal a haunting pattern. Each fragment completed its countdown, each reached its target orbit, each transmitted its final sequence, and then every trace of the civilizations in those systems vanished, their worlds left dark in the astronomical record. No radio signatures, no thermal signatures, nothing but silence spanning millennia, as though whatever message these fragments carry is not simply a communication, but an irreversible turning point, a moment of profound transformation or catastrophic consequence. And Earth now stands on the brink of receiving the last message in this cosmic chain, the final output of a machine older than stars. And the question that now grips humanity with suffocating dread is no longer whether the fragment will activate, no longer whether the countdown is real, but what awaits us on the other side of zero, what ancient intention will be revealed when this machine completes its eons-long journey, and what fate it has brought to the doorstep of our world after billions of years of silence. Billions of years of silence. Billions of years of silence. Billions of years